Nina Brooks walked through Denver International Airport with her carry-on bag rolling behind her. She had just finished a conference in Seattle, where she presented her latest research on advanced propulsion systems. The conference went well, and she felt good about the connections she made with other scientists. Now she just wanted to get home to Atlanta and see her daughter. Her flight was leaving from gate C-47, and she had plenty of time to board. The first-class ticket in her hand was a small luxury her company provided for long trips. She deserved it after 3 days of back-to-back presentations and meetings. The gate area was busy with travelers sitting in rows of chairs and standing in line. Nina checked the departure board and saw her flight was on time. She walked toward the Jetway entrance where a man in a Skybridge Airlines uniform stood checking boarding passes. His name tag read Kevin Palmer. Nina smiled and handed him her boarding pass and passport. She had flown hundreds of times, and this was routine. Kevin looked at her boarding pass for a long moment. His eyes narrowed and he looked from the pass to Nina and back again. Something felt wrong immediately. Kevin held up the boarding pass to the light as if examining it for forgery. Nina felt her stomach tighten. She knew this feeling. She had felt it countless times in her life. Kevin called over his shoulder to another employee. A woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun approached. Her name tag identified her as Linda Hayes, and her title was supervisor. Linda took the boarding pass from Kevin and examined it with the same suspicious expression. Nina stood calmly and waited. She had learned long ago that showing any emotion in situations like this only made things worse. Linda looked at Nina with cold eyes and asked if she had any other identification. Nina reached into her purse and pulled out her driver's license and her company identification badge. The badge clearly showed her name and her title as Senior Aerospace Engineer at Collins Dynamics. Linda barely glanced at the identification. She handed everything back to Kevin and whispered something in his ear. Nina felt the eyes of other passengers on her. Some were recording with their phones. She knew what this looked like. She knew what this was. Kevin told Nina that her boarding pass appeared irregular and that they needed to verify her identity. Nina explained calmly that she had checked in online and received the boarding pass directly from the Skybridge app on her phone. She offered to show them her email confirmation and her frequent flyer account. Linda cut her off and said they had the right to refuse boarding to any passenger they deemed suspicious. Nina felt her face grow hot, but she kept her voice steady. She asked what specifically was suspicious about her boarding pass. Kevin said it was company policy not to discuss security procedures. This was absurd, and Nina knew it. Her boarding pass was identical to every other boarding pass being scanned at that very moment. Other passengers in the first-class boarding line began to shift uncomfortably. An older white man behind Nina spoke up and said he could see nothing wrong with her documents. Linda turned to him and said this was none of his concern. The man persisted and said he was a lawyer, and this looked like discrimination. Linda's face flushed red, and she told the man to step back or he would be denied boarding as well. The man fell silent but continued recording on his phone. Nina took a deep breath and asked to speak to a manager above Linda. Linda smiled tightly and said she was the senior supervisor on duty. She then pulled out her radio and called for airport security. Nina felt her heart sink. She knew where this was going. She had done nothing wrong, but that did not matter. Within 2 minutes, a police officer arrived. His name tag read Daniel Cruz. Linda immediately began speaking to him in a low, urgent voice. She gestured at Nina several times. The officer looked at Nina, and his hand moved to rest on his belt near his handcuffs. Daniel approached Nina and asked her to step aside from the boarding area. Nina complied immediately. She asked what the problem was. Daniel said he had received a report of a disruptive passenger. Nina almost laughed at the absurdity but caught herself. She had not raised her voice once. She had not made any threatening gestures. She had simply asked to board a flight she had paid for with a valid ticket. Daniel asked for her identification and she provided everything again. He looked at her documents for a long moment and then looked back at Linda and Kevin. They both nodded as if confirming something. Daniel told Nina to turn around and place her hands behind her back. Nina felt the world slow down. She asked why she was being detained. Daniel said she was being removed for suspicious behavior and failure to comply with airline staff. Nina stated clearly that she had complied with every request. The passengers around the gate were now openly recording. Several people were shouting that this was wrong. Daniel ignored them and reached for Nina's wrists. She did not resist. She had a daughter at home, and she was not going to give anyone an excuse to hurt her. The metal handcuffs closed around her wrists with a cold click. Nina stood there in the middle of the airport terminal in handcuffs while dozens of people watched and recorded. Her carry-on bag sat abandoned by the Jetway entrance. Her boarding pass lay on the counter where Linda had placed it. The flight she was supposed to be on began boarding other passengers. First-class passengers walked past her with uncomfortable expressions. Some looked away. Some stared. Nina kept her head up and her expression calm. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Daniel led her away from the gate toward a security office. As they walked, Nina saw 3 other passengers being stopped by Kevin and Linda. All 3 were people of color. A young man with dark skin was being told his carry-on was too large despite being the same size as bags other passengers carried. A woman in a hijab was being questioned about her destination. An elderly Asian man was being asked repeatedly to prove he spoke English. Nina watched this happen as she was led past, and she understood this was not about her alone. This was policy. This was pattern. This was practice. The security office was small and windowless. Daniel removed the handcuffs and told Nina to wait. She sat in a plastic chair and waited for someone to tell her what happened next. Her flight departed without her. She missed her connection. She would not make it home that night. And somewhere out there, her humiliation was being uploaded to the internet, where millions would watch a black woman in handcuffs for the crime of trying to board a plane. The videos hit social media within minutes of Nina being led away in handcuffs. The first upload came from the lawyer who had spoken up in her defense. His video showed the entire interaction from the moment Kevin questioned Nina's boarding pass to the moment Daniel placed her in handcuffs. The audio was clear and the video quality was good. There was no ambiguity about what had happened. Nina had remained calm and polite throughout. The airline staff had escalated without cause. Within an hour, the video had been viewed 50,000 times. Within 3 hours, it reached 1 million views. Other passengers uploaded their videos from different angles. One video focused on Linda's face as she smirked while Nina was being handcuffed. Another video captured Kevin stopping the 3 other minority passengers after Nina was removed. A third video showed Nina sitting in the security office visible through a window, looking exhausted and defeated. The video spread across every platform. News outlets began covering the story on their evening broadcasts. Civil rights organizations issued statements. Celebrities shared the videos with their millions of followers. By midnight, the hashtag Skybridge shame was trending worldwide. Gregory Hunt was the chief executive officer of Skybridge Airlines, and he was asleep when his phone began ringing at 2 a.m. He had turned off most notifications, but his head of communications, Patricia Wells, had override access for emergencies. Gregory answered on the 4th ring expecting to hear about a plane crash or a terrorist incident. Instead, Patricia told him to open his laptop immediately. Her voice was tight with stress. Gregory sat up in bed and opened his computer. Patricia sent him a link and told him to watch. Gregory watched the video of Nina Brooks being handcuffed and felt sick to his stomach. He had worked in the airline industry for 30 years, and he knew exactly what he was watching. This was not a misunderstanding or a training failure. This was racism, plain and simple. He watched the video 3 more times looking for any detail that might explain the staff's behavior. There was nothing.
Nina had done everything right, and his employees had treated her like a criminal.
Gregory looked at the view count and saw it climbing every second. He looked at the comments and saw thousands of people calling for boycotts and lawsuits. Patricia was talking on the phone about crisis management and prepared statements. Gregory cut her off and asked her to send him everything she had on the incident. He wanted security footage from the airport. He wanted the personnel files of the employees involved. He wanted every complaint ever filed against those employees. He wanted the training records and policy manuals. Patricia said she could have most of that by morning. Gregory told her he needed it in 2 hours. He was not going to sleep and he was not going to wait. Gregory went to his home office and made coffee. He called the head of airport operations and woke him up. He called the head of human resources and woke her up. He called his general counsel and woke him up. He told all of them the same thing. He needed every piece of information about what happened in Denver, and he needed it immediately. His lawyer advised him not to review anything personally and to let the legal team handle it. Gregory ignored that advice. He was not hiding behind lawyers on this. He was going to know exactly what happened and why. The files started arriving in his email around 4 in the morning. Gregory opened the personnel file for Kevin Palmer first. Kevin had been with Skybridge for 4 years. His performance reviews were average, but attached to his file were complaint records. 7 passengers had filed formal complaints about Kevin in the past 18 months. 4 of those complaints specifically mentioned racial discrimination. 1 black passenger said Kevin had accused him of stealing a first-class upgrade. 1 Hispanic passenger said Kevin had insisted on searching her bag for drugs. 1 Asian passenger said Kevin had mocked his accent. The complaints had been investigated by Linda Hayes, who was Kevin's direct supervisor. She had cleared Kevin of wrongdoing in every single case. Gregory opened Linda's file next. She had been with Skybridge for 12 years. She had worked her way up from gate agent to supervisor. Her file contained complaints as well. Passengers had accused her of being rude and dismissive. Several complaints mentioned that she seemed to treat white passengers differently than minority passengers. All of these complaints had been investigated by her manager, who had accepted her explanations and taken no action. Gregory sat back in his chair and stared at his computer screen. This was not one bad incident. This was systemic failure. His company had allowed this to continue for years. The security footage from Denver arrived at 5 in the morning. Gregory watched it from multiple camera angles. The footage confirmed everything the passenger videos had shown. Nina approached the gate calmly. She provided identification without hesitation. She never raised her voice or made any threatening gesture. Kevin and Linda treated her with suspicion from the first moment. The footage also showed the 3 other minority passengers being stopped after Nina was removed. Kevin appeared to be enjoying himself as he denied boarding to people who had valid tickets and had done nothing wrong. Gregory made his decision at 6 in the morning as the sun started to rise. He called Patricia and told her to arrange a press conference for 9. She tried to talk him out of it. She said the lawyers needed time to prepare a statement. She said he should wait for more information. She said a press conference this soon could expose the company to liability. Gregory cut her off again and said the press conference was happening whether she arranged it or not. He was going to speak directly to the public and he was going to tell the truth. Gregory called the head of human resources and told her to prepare termination. Paperwork for Kevin Palmer and Linda Hayes. She started to object and talk about procedures and due process. Gregory said this was not a discussion. The employees were being terminated effective immediately for gross misconduct and violation of company policy. He also wanted the names of every supervisor who had dismissed complaints against Kevin. Those people were being suspended pending review. The head of human resources said this was going to result in lawsuits. Gregory said he did not care. Gregory then did something almost unheard of for a chief executive officer facing a scandal. He found Nina Brooks's phone number through airport security records and he called her himself. No lawyers. No public relations staff. Just him calling to apologize directly. Nina answered on the second ring. Her voice was tired and wary. Gregory identified himself and asked if she had a few minutes to talk. Nina said she was surprised he was calling personally. Most companies sent lawyers or made no contact at all. Gregory apologized. He did not make excuses or try to minimize what happened. He said his employees had treated her with cruelty and racism. He said she had been humiliated for no reason other than the color of her skin. He said this was unacceptable, and he was taking immediate action. He told her about the terminations. He told her about the suspensions. He offered to pay for any legal representation she wanted to retain. He did not ask her to drop any potential lawsuit. He did not ask her to sign anything. He just apologized and asked what accountability looked like to her. Nina was quiet for a long moment. She said she appreciated the call, but words were not enough. She had been handcuffed in front of hundreds of people. She had missed her flight and been treated like a criminal. An apology did not undo that trauma. Gregory agreed. He asked her what would make this right. Nina said she did not know yet. She needed time to process what happened. Gregory gave her his personal cell phone number and told her to call him anytime. He meant it. Nina thanked him and ended the call. Gregory sat in his office and looked at the videos playing on repeat on the news. In 3 hours, he would face the cameras and accept responsibility for his company's failure. Gregory Hunt stood behind a podium at Skybridge Airline's headquarters at exactly 9 in the morning. Television cameras from every major news network pointed at him. Reporters filled the room with notebooks and recording devices. His public relations team had begged him to read from a prepared statement. His lawyers had insisted he say nothing that could be used against the company in court. Gregory had listened to all of their concerns and then told them he was going to speak from his heart. If that created legal problems, then those were problems he was willing to face. The room fell silent as Gregory began to speak. He did not start with corporate language about being concerned or taking the matter seriously. He started by calling the incident exactly what it was. He said Nina Brooks had been racially profiled by his employees. He said she had been humiliated and traumatized for no reason other than racism. He said this was not a misunderstanding or a miscommunication. It was discrimination and it was unacceptable. The reporters in the room looked shocked. Corporate executives did not usually admit wrongdoing so directly. Gregory continued speaking. He announced that Kevin Palmer and Linda Hayes had been terminated effective immediately. He said they were fired for gross misconduct and for violating both company policy and basic human decency. He also announced that 3 supervisors who had dismissed previous complaints against Kevin were suspended pending a full investigation. He said anyone in the company who had enabled this behavior would face consequences. There would be no protection for people who looked the other way when discrimination occurred. The reporters started shouting questions, but Gregory held up his hand. He was not finished. He said that Skybridge would pay for Nina Brooks to retain any legal representation she wanted. The company would not fight her claims or try to silence her with settlement agreements. If she wanted to sue the company or the individuals involved, she had every right to do so. Gregory said he had spoken to Nina directly that morning to apologize. He did not hide behind intermediaries or lawyers. He called her himself because that was the right thing to do. Gregory then addressed the airport police officer who had handcuffed Nina. He said he had contacted the Denver Police Department and requested that Daniel Cruz be banned from all Skybridge gates pending a full review of his actions. The company would not work with officers who failed to assess situations properly and who acted on the word of biased employees without doing their own investigation. This announcement caused an uproar in the room. Airlines rarely challenged law enforcement publicly. Gregory did not care about the traditional relationships. An officer had put an innocent woman in handcuffs and that officer should face consequences. The questions came rapid fire after that. A reporter asked if Gregory was concerned about lawsuits from the terminated employees. Gregory said he welcomed those lawsuits because they would create a public record of what happened and why the terminations were justified. Another reporter asked if this was just a public relations move to protect the company's reputation. Gregory looked directly into the camera and said if he cared only about public relations, he would have issued a vague apology and waited for the story to fade. Instead, he was taking real action with real consequences because it was the right thing to do. A reporter from a business network asked about the impact on shareholder value. Gregory's answer became the most quoted line from the press conference. He said if shareholders valued profit more than human dignity, then they should sell their stock because he was not running that kind of company. He said Skybridge would succeed by treating people fairly, not by enabling racism. The reporter looked stunned. Corporate executives did not usually tell shareholders they could leave if they disagreed. With ethical decisions, Gregory wrapped up the press conference by announcing a full, independent audit of Skybridge's culture and practices. The audit would be conducted by civil rights experts and the results would be made public. He said if the audit found systemic problems, then the company would fix those problems regardless of cost. He thanked the reporters and walked off the stage without taking additional questions. His communications team looked pale. His lawyers looked angry. Gregory felt more certain about his actions than he had felt about anything in years. The reaction to the press conference was immediate and divided. Civil rights organizations praised Gregory's direct accountability. Business analysts criticized him for exposing the company to legal liability. Some praised his moral courage. Others called it a publicity stunt. Stock market investors panicked and Skybridge stock dropped 11% in the first hour of trading. Gregory's phone rang constantly with board members demanding explanations. He let most of the calls go to voicemail.
He had made his decision and he was not going to back down because some investors were nervous. Nina Brooks watched the press conference from her hotel room in Denver.
She had not been able to get a flight home the previous night and had stayed in an airport hotel. Watching Gregory speak, she felt something unexpected. She felt heard. Most companies would have issued a bland statement expressing concern and promising to investigate. Gregory had done something completely different. He had admitted fault immediately. He had taken action immediately. He had not asked her permission or tried to control the narrative. He had simply done what was right. Nina's phone rang, and it was her colleague Marcus Chen calling from their lab in Atlanta. Marcus had seen the press conference, and he wanted to know how Nina was doing. Nina admitted she was still processing everything. Being handcuffed in an airport had brought back every instance of discrimination she had ever faced. Every time a store clerk followed her, every time someone clutched their purse tighter when she walked past, every time she had to work twice as hard to prove she deserved to be in the room. The airport incident was not isolated. It was part of a pattern she had lived with her entire life. Marcus understood. He had his own experiences with discrimination as an Asian American in academic spaces. He told Nina that what happened to her mattered beyond her personal experience. The videos had been seen by millions of people. Gregory's response had set a new standard for corporate accountability. This moment could lead to real change if people kept pushing for it. Nina said she did not want to be a symbol or a spokesperson. She just wanted to go home and hug her daughter and get back to her work. Marcus told her that was fine. She did not owe anyone her trauma or her time. But if she decided to speak out, he would support her. Nina hung up and lay back on the hotel bed. She thought about her work at Collins Dynamics. She was developing propulsion systems that could potentially carry humans to other star systems. She was helping to push humanity toward a future among the stars. But what was the point of reaching for the stars if humans could not treat each other with basic dignity here on Earth? If people carried their hatreds and prejudices into space, they would only poison the cosmos with the same cruelty that infected their home planet. Nina made a decision. She would speak out, but not in the way people expected. She would talk about the connection between human advancement and human ethics. She would challenge people to become better before they spread to other worlds. She had a platform now, whether she wanted it or not. She could use that platform to say something that mattered. She opened her laptop and started writing notes for the speech she would give at the International Space Conference in 3 days. Back at Skybridge headquarters, Gregory was meeting with his leadership team. The mood in the room was tense. The chief financial officer presented projections showing potential losses from the scandal and the stock drop. The general counsel outlined the legal risks of admitting fault so publicly. The head of operations worried about employee morale if people felt they could be fired immediately without lengthy investigations. Gregory listened to all of their concerns and then asked a simple question. Did they believe Kevin Palmer and Linda Hayes deserved to keep their jobs after what they did? No one in the room could say yes to that question. Gregory nodded and said that was the only question that mattered. Everything else was secondary to doing the right thing. If the company took a financial hit, then they would recover. If shareholders left, then new shareholders would come. If employees were worried about being fired without cause, then those employees should know that treating customers with dignity was not negotiable. The line was clear. Discrimination would not be tolerated under any circumstances. The leadership team left the meeting without consensus, but with clarity about Gregory's position. Nina Brooks sat in her lab at Collins Dynamics, staring at equations that had consumed her life for the past 3 years. The walls were covered with diagrams of engine designs and calculations for theoretical propulsion systems. Her desk held models of spacecraft components and tablets displaying simulations of ion drives and plasma acceleration. This work was her passion and her purpose. She was helping to design the engines that would carry humanity beyond the solar system. But after what happened at the airport, she found herself questioning whether humanity deserved to reach the stars. Marcus Chen found her sitting in the dark lab at 7 in the evening. He flipped on the lights and Nina blinked against the sudden brightness. Marcus set down 2 containers of food from the Thai place they both liked. He did not ask if she was okay because that was a stupid question. Instead, he sat down and started eating and waited for Nina to talk if she wanted to. They sat in silence for several minutes before Nina finally spoke. She asked Marcus if he thought humans were ready to meet other intelligent life. Marcus considered the question seriously. He said humans were barely ready to meet each other most days. Nina laughed despite herself. She said that was exactly her point. Humans still discriminated against each other over things as meaningless as skin color, and gender and religion. They started wars over resources and ideology. They destroyed their own planet for profit. And now they wanted to spread to other worlds and potentially encounter alien civilizations. What would humans do when they met beings truly different from themselves? If they could not accept diversity within their own species, how would they react to actual aliens? Marcus said that was a fair concern, but he also believed humans were capable of growth. The fact that what happened to Nina sparked outrage showed that many people recognized injustice when they saw it. Nina said recognition was not the same as change. People got outraged online for a few days and then moved on to the next viral story. The systems that enabled discrimination remained in place. She had been handcuffed at an airport, but she was far from the first black person to experience racial profiling. This happened every day to countless people who did not have videos to prove what occurred. The anger people felt watching her humiliation would fade, but the conditions that created that humiliation would continue. Marcus agreed that systemic change was slow and difficult, but he said individual actions mattered. Gregory Hunt had done something unusual by taking immediate accountability. That created a precedent other companies might follow. Nina opened her food container and started eating. She told Marcus about the International Space Conference, where she was scheduled to present her propulsion research in 2 days. Scientists from 15 countries would be there. Government officials and private industry leaders would be there. The media would be there to report on the latest developments in space exploration. Nina had been planning to focus her presentation purely on the technical aspects of her engine design. But now she was considering saying something more. She wanted to talk about the ethics of space exploration. She wanted to challenge the assumption that technological advancement was enough. Marcus asked what she had in mind. Nina pulled up the notes she had been writing since the hotel room in Denver. She had outlined a speech that connected her propulsion work to questions of human values. She argued that the ability to travel to other star systems meant nothing if humans carried their worst traits with them. A species that practiced racism and exploitation would only become a danger to any worlds it colonized or any civilizations it encountered. Before humans reached for the stars, they needed to become worthy of that reach. They needed to address injustice at home before spreading their influence beyond Earth. Marcus read through the notes and whistled softly. He said this was powerful, but it would be controversial. Some people would accuse Nina of being political or divisive. Some would say science should be kept separate from social issues. Nina said she did not care about those criticisms. Science was never separate from society. Every technological advancement raised ethical questions about how that technology would be used. Nuclear physics could power cities or destroy them. Genetic engineering could cure diseases or create new forms of inequality. Space exploration could unite humanity in common purpose or extend human conflicts to new frontiers. Scientists had a responsibility to consider these questions, not just build the technology and walk away. Marcus agreed completely. He said Nina should give the speech she wanted to give. He reminded her that she had earned her position through brilliant work, and she had the right to speak her mind. If people did not like it, that was their problem. Nina smiled and felt some of her confidence returning. She spent the next 2 days refining her speech and practicing her delivery. She sent a courtesy copy to the conference organizers, who responded with nervousness, but ultimately approved it. They could not really stop her anyway, since she was the keynote speaker, and her propulsion research was the main draw of the conference. The conference was held at the National Space Center in Houston. The auditorium held 500 people and every seat was filled. Nina stood backstage listening to her introduction and feeling her heart pound. The moderator listed her credentials and achievements. Senior aerospace engineer at Collins Dynamics, lead researcher on the Artemis Beyond Propulsion Project, author of 12 peer-reviewed papers on advanced engine design. The moderator carefully did not mention the airport incident, but everyone in the room knew about it. That was partly why attendance was so high. People wanted to see what Nina would say. Nina walked onto the stage to strong applause. She took her place at the podium and looked out at the audience. She saw colleagues from her lab. She saw representatives from NASA and the European Space Agency. She saw journalists with cameras and recording equipment. She saw Marcus sitting in the third row giving her an encouraging nod. Nina took a breath and began speaking. She started with the technical details of her propulsion system. She explained how magnetic field manipulation and plasma acceleration could achieve velocities that made interstellar travel feasible within a human lifetime. She showed simulations and calculations. She gave the presentation everyone expected. Then Nina shifted gears. She said she wanted to talk about why humans should go to the stars and what responsibilities came with that capability. She described the moment she was handcuffed at the airport. She did not dwell on her personal pain, but used it as an example of a larger problem. She said humans still struggled with basic concepts of equality and dignity. They divided themselves over arbitrary characteristics and treated those divisions as meaningful. If humans carried these attitudes into space, they would become a plague on the galaxy. They would poison every world they touched with the same conflicts that scarred Earth. The audience was completely silent. Nina continued speaking. She said the ability to travel to other star systems was almost within reach. Her engine design and the work of researchers around the world would make it possible in the coming decades. But technical capability was not the same as moral readiness. Humans needed to prove they could create just societies before they deserved to spread beyond their home world. This meant addressing racism and inequality and exploitation. It meant building systems that valued cooperation over domination. It meant becoming a species that could meet alien intelligence with humility and respect, rather than fear and conquest. Nina concluded by saying that space exploration should inspire humans to be better. The vast cosmos put human conflicts in perspective. The distances between stars dwarfed the borders humans drew on maps. The timescales of stellar evolution made human history seem like a brief flicker. Confronting the immensity of the universe should humble humans and unite them in common purpose. But that would only happen if people chose to let it. The choice was between bringing the best of humanity to the stars or spreading the worst of humanity to new worlds. Nina said she hoped humans would choose wisely. She thanked the audience and stepped back from the podium. The applause started slowly and then built to a standing ovation. Not everyone stood. Some people looked uncomfortable or disapproving. But most of the audience was on their feet clapping enthusiastically. Nina saw several people wiping their eyes. The moderator returned to the stage and asked if there were any questions. Dozens of hands shot up. The questions ranged from technical details about the propulsion system to philosophical discussions about human nature and space ethics. Nina answered them all with the same directness she had shown in her speech. One reporter asked if Nina thought the airport incident had affected her view of space exploration. Nina said it had clarified something she already believed. Technology without ethics was dangerous. Humans had amazing capabilities, but they also had terrible flaws. The question was, which side would win as humanity expanded into the cosmos? Another person asked if Nina was optimistic about humanity's future. Nina said she was cautiously hopeful. The fact that so many people were outraged by what happened to her showed that moral progress was possible. But optimism required action, not just sentiment. People had to actively work to create the world they wanted rather than passively hoping things would improve. Gregory Hunt knew that firing 2 employees was not enough to fix what was broken at Skybridge Airlines. The airport incident revealed symptoms of a deeper disease. He commissioned an independent audit of the entire company culture and prepared himself for bad news. The audit was conducted by the National Civil Rights Institute and took 6 weeks to complete. Auditors interviewed hundreds of employees at every level. They reviewed hiring records and promotion decisions. They analyzed customer complaints and employee grievance reports. They examined training materials and policy enforcement. The final report was 200 pages long, and Gregory read every word. The findings were worse than he expected. The audit revealed systematic bias throughout the organization. People of color made up 38% of entry-level employees, but only 12% of management positions. Women made up 51% of customer service staff, but only 19% of leadership roles. The promotion rate for white employees was significantly higher than for equally qualified minority employees. Exit interviews showed that many employees of color left the company citing discrimination and lack of opportunity. Customer complaints about discriminatory treatment were routinely dismissed or given minimal investigation. The audit identified what it called a culture of silence. Employees who reported discrimination faced retaliation or were labeled as troublemakers. Managers protected staff members who generated complaints if those staff members were otherwise productive. Training on diversity and inclusion was superficial and treated as a box to check rather than a meaningful priority. The company valued efficiency and customer throughput over fair treatment. This created an environment where bias was tolerated, as long as it did not create public embarrassment. The airport incident was not an aberration. It was the inevitable result of years of institutional neglect. Gregory called a meeting of all senior leadership to discuss the audit results. He distributed copies of the report and gave everyone 2 days to read it thoroughly. When they reconvened, the mood in the room was somber. Some executives looked defensive. Others looked embarrassed. A few looked genuinely shocked at what the audit had revealed. Gregory started the meeting by acknowledging his own failure. He had been chief executive officer for 5 years, and he had not seen or addressed these problems. That was on him. He should have been asking harder questions and demanding better accountability. He had failed the employees and customers who experienced discrimination under his watch. Gregory then outlined a comprehensive plan for change. First, the company would establish an independent civil rights board with real authority. This board would have 5 members, including civil rights experts and community leaders. The board could investigate complaints of discrimination without permission from company management. They could mandate consequences, including termination, and they could override decisions by executives. The board would report directly to the company's board of directors, not to Gregory. This ensured independence and prevented leadership from burying problems. Some executives objected that this gave outsiders too much power over company operations. Gregory said that was the point. Internal oversight had failed and external accountability was necessary. Second, the company would create a compensation fund for customers who had experienced discrimination. Any passenger with a credible complaint could apply for compensation without having to file a lawsuit. The fund would start at $10 million and would be administered by the Civil Rights Board. Importantly, passengers who received compensation would not be required to sign non-disclosure agreements or waive their right to sue. This was about making amends, not silencing critics. The General Counsel argued this would expose the company to massive liability. Gregory said the liability already existed because the harm had already occurred. Compensating victims was simply acknowledging that fact. Third, the company would completely overhaul its training and hiring practices. Every employee would undergo intensive anti-bias training developed by external experts. Managers would be trained on recognizing and addressing discrimination. Hiring and promotion decisions would be reviewed by diverse panels rather than individual managers. Performance evaluations would include specific metrics on fair treatment and inclusive leadership. The head of human resources worried this would slow down operations and make management decisions more complicated. Gregory said good. Quick decisions that perpetuated bias were not worth making. The company would prioritize getting things right over getting things done fast. Fourth, and most controversially, Gregory announced that executive bonuses, including his own, would be tied to diversity, metrics, and complaint resolution scores. If the company failed to improve representation in leadership by measurable amounts, then executives would not receive performance bonuses. If customer satisfaction scores among minority passengers did not improve, then executives would not receive performance bonuses. If discrimination complaints were not resolved to the satisfaction of the complainants, then executives would not receive performance bonuses. This meant senior leadership had direct financial incentive to care about equity. Several executives objected strenuously. They argued this punished them for problems they did not create. Gregory said they were being paid to solve problems, not to maintain comfortable systems. The plan was announced publicly 1 week after Gregory received the audit report. The reaction was immediate and intense. Civil rights organizations praised the comprehensiveness of the changes. Some called it a model that other companies should follow. Business analysts were more critical. Stock analysts downgraded Skybridge's rating, citing increased costs and regulatory risk. Several investors called for Gregory's resignation. The stock price dropped another 8%. Gregory received angry calls from board members who worried about shareholder value. He told them the same thing he had said before. If shareholders cared only about short-term profit, then they should sell their stock. He was building a company that would succeed over the long term by doing the right thing. The first month after the changes was chaotic. Employees struggled to adapt to new procedures and oversight. Some staff members who had thrived under the old system suddenly faced accountability for behavior that had been previously tolerated. 3 managers were fired in the first 2 weeks after the Civil Rights Board investigated long-standing complaints. 2 gate supervisors resigned rather than face investigation. The media covered every development, and critics said Gregory had created a witch hunt. Supporters said he was finally addressing deep-rooted problems. The truth was somewhere in between. Real change was messy and uncomfortable, but it was necessary. Then something unexpected began to happen. Customer bookings started to shift. Travelers who had avoided Skybridge because of its reputation began choosing the airline specifically because of the changes Gregory implemented. Corporate clients who valued ethical practices moved their travel contracts to Skybridge. Many passengers, especially minority travelers, said they felt safer flying with an airline that took discrimination seriously. Online reviews mentioned the reforms as a positive factor in choosing the airline. The financial analysts who predicted disaster started revising their models. 3 months after the reforms were announced, Skybridge released its quarterly earnings report. Revenue was up 6% compared to the same quarter the previous year. The increase came entirely from growth in bookings from minority travelers and ethically conscious consumers. The stock price began to recover. It climbed slowly at first and then more rapidly as investors realized the company was not collapsing. 6 months after the airport incident, the stock price exceeded its level from before the scandal. Gregory did not gloat or claim vindication. He knew the work was far from finished. Culture change took years, not months. But the initial results suggested that doing the right thing and running a successful business were not mutually exclusive. The Civil Rights Board issued its first public report after 90 days. The report acknowledged progress but identified ongoing challenges. Representation and leadership had improved slightly but not enough. Customer complaints were being investigated more thoroughly, but resolution times were still too long. Training programs were better, but some employees remained resistant to change. The board made specific recommendations for improvement and set clear targets for the next quarter. Gregory accepted all of the recommendations and committed to meeting the targets. He made the board's report available on the company website for anyone to read. Transparency was essential to accountability. Nina Brooks watched these developments from a distance. She had not flown Skybridge since the incident and had no plans to do so in the near future. But she recognized that Gregory was doing something unusual. Most corporate leaders would have issued an apology and moved on. Gregory was systematically dismantling the structures that enabled discrimination. That did not undo what happened to Nina, but it might prevent it from happening to others. Marcus encouraged her to acknowledge the changes publicly. Nina was reluctant at first. She did not want to give Gregory credit just for doing what should have been done all along, but she also believed in recognizing real effort when she saw it. Kevin Palmer and Linda Hayes hired lawyers 3 weeks after their terminations. They filed wrongful termination lawsuits against Skybridge Airlines, claiming they had been scapegoated for following company procedures. Their legal team argued that the employees had never received adequate training on unconscious bias, and that they were acting within the discretionary authority given to gate agents. The lawsuits claimed that Skybridge fired them to appease public outrage, rather than because they had actually violated policy. They sought reinstatement with back pay and damages for emotional distress and reputational harm. The lawsuits attracted significant media attention and became a test case for corporate accountability. Gregory Hunt received the lawsuit notification from his general counsel, who looked almost relieved. The legal team had been telling Gregory for months that his public statements created liability. Now they had proof. Kevin and Linda's lawyers would use Gregory's press conference against him. They would argue that he admitted the company was at fault before conducting a proper investigation. They would claim the terminations were rushed and politically motivated. The general counsel recommended settling immediately to avoid a costly trial and more negative publicity. Gregory read through the legal filings carefully, and then told his general counsel to prepare for trial. There would be no settlement. He wanted a public record of what happened and why the terminations were justified. The legal team was horrified. Trials were expensive and unpredictable. A jury might sympathize with employees who claimed they were just doing their jobs. The plaintiff's lawyers would paint Kevin and Linda as victims of corporate overreach. Gregory acknowledged these risks but said the principle mattered more than the outcome. If Skybridge settled, then Kevin and Linda could claim they were wrongly terminated. If the case went to trial, then all the evidence would be public. The pattern of complaints against Kevin would be public. The way Linda dismissed those complaints would be public. The security footage showing Nina's calm demeanor would be public. Gregory wanted that record to exist regardless of what the jury decided. The trial began 11 months after the airport incident. The courtroom was packed with reporters and spectators. Kevin and Linda sat at the plaintiff's table looking nervous but determined. Their lead attorney was a man named Richard Cole who specialized in employment law. Richard's opening statement painted his clients as dedicated employees who made a difficult judgment call in a stressful situation. He said gate agents deal with suspicious behavior every day and have to make split-second decisions to protect passenger safety. He said Kevin and Linda acted in good faith based on their training and experience. He said Skybridge threw them under the bus to protect the company's image. He asked the jury to see his clients as human beings who made an honest mistake, not as villains deserving of public destruction. Skybridge's lead attorney was a woman named Helen Yu who had extensive experience in civil rights cases. Helen's opening statement was more direct. She said this case was not about an honest mistake or good faith judgment. It was about a pattern of discriminatory behavior that the company had enabled for too long. She said Kevin Palmer had received multiple complaints about racial bias, and his supervisor Linda Hayes had protected him every time. She said the airport incident was simply the moment when their behavior became public and undeniable. She said the terminations were justified not because of public pressure, but because the employees had violated their duty to treat all passengers fairly. She told the jury they would see clear evidence of discrimination throughout the trial. The testimony took 3 weeks. Kevin Palmer took the stand and described his version of events. He said Nina's boarding pass looked different from other passes, and he was trained to question anything unusual. He said he asked for additional identification, which was standard procedure. He said Nina became agitated, which made him more suspicious. His testimony contradicted the security footage, but he maintained his account. On cross-examination, Helen asked Kevin about the 7 previous complaints filed against him. Kevin claimed those passengers had misunderstood his intentions. Helen asked why all 7 complaints came from minority passengers. Kevin said that was coincidence. Helen asked if Kevin noticed he never questioned white passengers with similar boarding passes. Kevin said he treated everyone the same. Helen played security footage showing Kevin waving white passengers through without additional scrutiny. In the same time period, he stopped Nina. Kevin had no good answer. Linda Hayes testified that she trusted Kevin's judgment because he was an experienced employee. She said she reviewed the complaints against him and found them unsubstantiated. She said passengers sometimes made false accusations when they were unhappy about other issues. On cross-examination, Helen asked Linda to explain her investigation process. Linda admitted she usually just asked Kevin for his side of the story and accepted his explanation. Helen asked if Linda ever interviewed the passengers who complained. Linda said she did not think that was necessary. Helen asked if Linda saw any pattern in the fact that complaints came repeatedly from minority passengers. Linda said she did not look for patterns. Helen suggested that was exactly the problem. Linda became defensive and said she did the best she could with limited time and resources. Helen said the best she could do was not good enough. The most powerful testimony came from Nina Brooks herself. She took the stand wearing a professional suit and spoke in a calm, clear voice. She described approaching the gate with a valid boarding pass and proper identification. She described Kevin's suspicious examination of her documents. She described remaining polite despite the increasingly absurd accusations. She described the humiliation of being handcuffed in front of hundreds of people. She described missing her flight and being treated like a criminal for the offense of existing while black. Nina did not cry or show anger. She simply stated facts. The jury watched her intently. Several jury members looked uncomfortable as they imagined themselves in her situation. Richard Cole tried to shake Nina's testimony on cross-examination. He suggested she might have misinterpreted Kevin's intentions. Nina calmly pointed out that being handcuffed was not open to interpretation. Richard suggested that Nina's own behavior might have contributed to the escalation. Nina asked him to identify anything in the security footage that showed her being aggressive or uncooperative. Richard had no answer. He tried to suggest that gate agents see real threats and have to be cautious. Nina said she agreed security was important, but she was obviously not a threat, and treating every black passenger as suspicious was racism, not security. Richard sat down, having failed to undermine her credibility. The trial also included expert testimony about racial bias in security contexts. A professor of psychology explained how unconscious bias affects judgment and leads people to perceive minority individuals as more threatening. A former airline security officer testified that proper training teaches agents to look for specific behavioral indicators, not demographic characteristics. A civil rights attorney explained how patterns of complaints should trigger investigation and intervention. All of this testimony supported Skybridge's position that Kevin and Linda had failed in their duties, and that the company was right to terminate them. The defense also called character witnesses who said, Kevin and Linda were good people who were not racist. Co-workers testified that they had never seen discriminatory behavior. Family members said Kevin and Linda treated everyone with respect. These testimonies were meant to humanize the plaintiffs and suggest their actions at the airport were aberrations, not patterns. Helen did not dispute that Kevin and Linda might be kind to people they knew. She said the issue was how they treated strangers, especially strangers who did not look like them. Character witnesses could not erase the documented complaints and the security footage. The closing arguments brought everything together. Richard Cole made an emotional appeal about ruining people's lives over one incident. He said Kevin and Linda had families and bills and reputations that had been destroyed. He said they deserved compassion and a second chance. He argued that immediate termination without progressive discipline was excessive. Helen Yu responded by saying this was not about one incident. This was about a pattern that the company had finally addressed. She said Nina Brooks had a family and a reputation too, and she was the one who was actually harmed. She said accountability was not cruelty. It was necessary for justice. She asked the jury to consider what message they wanted to send about how employees should treat customers and what consequences should follow discriminatory behavior. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the verdict was clear. They found in favor of Skybridge Airlines on all counts. The terminations were justified. Kevin and Linda were not entitled to reinstatement or damages. The jury foreman read a brief statement saying the evidence showed a pattern of discriminatory behavior that warranted termination. Several jury members nodded in agreement. Kevin and Linda sat stunned at the plaintiff's table. Richard Cole began planning an appeal. Gregory Hunt released a statement thanking the jury and reaffirming the company's commitment to fair treatment for all. 3 years passed after the airport incident and life moved forward. Nina Brooks continued her work on advanced propulsion systems. Her engine design progressed from theoretical models to working prototypes. Collins Dynamics secured government funding for a demonstration mission that would test the technology in deep space. Gregory Hunt continued leading Skybridge Airlines through its transformation. The company's culture improved measurably, though problems remained. The work of building just systems was ongoing and difficult, but the commitment was real. The world kept turning and the incident faded from daily headlines, though its impact remained in changed policies and precedents. Then, on a Tuesday morning in October, something happened that changed everything. The Arecibo Observatory in Puerto Rico detected a signal from deep space. The signal was clearly artificial. It contained mathematical patterns that could not occur naturally. The sequence repeated every 11 hours, suggesting it was a deliberate transmission. The source was traced to a star system designated HD 95735, located approximately 11.4 light-years from Earth. Astronomers had known for years that HD 9735 had potentially habitable planets. Now they knew something lived there, and that something had technology capable of interstellar communication. The discovery was kept quiet for 3 days while scientists verified the findings. Every major observatory on Earth was directed to monitor HD 95735. The signal was confirmed by dozens of independent sources. There was no doubt. Humanity had received its first confirmed message from an extraterrestrial intelligence. The news was released simultaneously by space agencies around the world. The announcement was carefully worded to avoid panic. Scientists emphasized that the signal was coming from over 11 light-years away. Whatever sent it would not arrive at Earth anytime soon. But the implications were staggering. Humanity was not alone in the universe. The global reaction was a mixture of excitement and fear. Religious leaders debated what alien life meant for their faiths. Governments convened emergency sessions to discuss security implications. Scientists celebrated the confirmation of what many had believed for decades. Ordinary people looked up at the night sky with new wonder and new anxiety. Social media exploded with speculation about what the aliens looked like and whether they were friendly. The message itself was mathematical and contained no obvious information about the senders. It simply announced presence. We are here. We are intelligent. We know you exist because we can see your radio transmissions. This is us saying hello. An international coalition formed within a week to coordinate humanity's response. The United Nations established a committee that included scientists from 15 countries. Nina Brooks was appointed to the Communications Subcommittee. Her expertise in deep space systems made her an obvious choice, but she was also chosen because of her public advocacy for ethical advancement. The people crafting humanity's first message to aliens needed to think carefully about what that message should say. Nina understood the weight of this responsibility. Whatever humanity sent into space would represent the entire species to an unknown intelligence. That message needed to be honest and thoughtful. The committee met for the first time in Geneva. The room held astronomers and linguists and philosophers and diplomats. Everyone had different ideas about what to say. Some argued humanity should emphasize its technological achievements. Look at what we have built. We split the atom. We decoded DNA. We sent machines to other planets. We are advanced and capable. Others argued humanity should emphasize its cultural richness. We create art and music. We write stories and poems. We have diverse traditions and beliefs. We are complex and interesting. Still others argued humanity should focus on peaceful intentions. We mean no harm. We seek knowledge and friendship. We hope to learn from you. Nina listened to these proposals and felt increasingly uncomfortable. All of them presented idealized versions of humanity. They highlighted achievements while ignoring failures. They suggested unity that did not exist. They implied moral development that humanity had not achieved. Nina thought about the airport incident and what it revealed about human nature. She thought about discrimination and war and environmental destruction. She thought about how humans treated each other and their own planet. If humanity was going to introduce itself to aliens, then that introduction should be honest. Anything else was a lie. Nina proposed something radical during the third day of meetings. She suggested humanity's message should acknowledge its flaws. We are a species still learning how to live with ourselves. We have achieved remarkable things, but we have also caused tremendous harm. We struggle with prejudice and violence. We damage our world through greed and short-sightedness. We are reaching out to you not as perfected beings, but as works in progress. We hope contact with other intelligent life will help us become better than we have been. This proposal created immediate controversy. Several committee members said it made humanity look weak or primitive. Some worried it would invite exploitation if the aliens were hostile. Others said first contact was not the time for confession. Nina stood her ground. She said honesty was the only ethical foundation for communication. The debate continued for weeks. Committee members consulted with their governments and scientific communities. Public opinion was divided. Some people agreed with Nina that humility was appropriate. Others wanted humanity to present strength and confidence. The discussion became heated and personal. One delegate accused Nina of hating humanity. Nina responded that she loved humanity enough to want it to be honest about itself. She said pretending to be something you were not was no foundation for any relationship, whether with other humans or with aliens. Eventually, a compromise emerged. The message would include both achievements and acknowledgments of ongoing challenges. It would present humanity as capable but imperfect. It would emphasize the desire to learn and grow. Nina worked with linguists and mathematicians to encode the message. The format was primarily mathematical, since that was the universal language most likely to be understood. But embedded in the mathematics were concepts translated as carefully as possible. Humanity is diverse. We have many cultures and beliefs. We create technology and art. We struggle with conflict and cooperation. We are aware of our limitations. We seek knowledge and peaceful contact. We hope to learn from you. The message was reviewed by dozens of experts and approved by the International Committee. It was transmitted from multiple locations on Earth using the most powerful radio telescopes available. The signal would take 11.4 years to reach HD 95735. If the aliens responded immediately, it would be another 11.4 years before humanity received that response. First contact was happening on a timescale of decades. Nina returned to her lab after the message was sent. She felt strange about the whole experience. She had helped craft humanity's introduction to alien intelligence. That was either the most important thing she would ever do, or it was meaningless if the aliens never responded or could not understand the message. Marcus asked her how she felt about what they had sent. Nina said she felt like humanity had been honest for once. The message did not claim humanity was perfect or peaceful or wise. It claimed humanity was trying. That was true. Whether it was enough remained to be seen. The message transmission became a global event. Millions of people watched live broadcasts from the observatories. Children asked their parents what would happen next. Scientists explained the long wait for any response. The message became part of human culture overnight. It was referenced in art and music. It sparked philosophical debates in classrooms and coffee shops. Some people felt proud that humanity had reached this milestone. Others felt small and insignificant in a universe that contained other minds. Nina felt both. She felt awe at the existence of alien intelligence. She felt responsibility for representing her species honestly. She felt hope that contact might inspire humanity to live up to its best ideals. Gregory Hunt watched the message transmission from his office at Skybridge headquarters. He thought about the path that led to this moment. The airport incident had forced him to confront his company's failures. That confrontation led to real change. The change proved that institutions could transform when leaders chose accountability. Now humanity was confronting its collective failures on a cosmic scale. The message admitted that humans struggled with prejudice and conflict. That admission was uncomfortable but necessary. Gregory believed the same principle that guided his company's transformation applied to humanity's first contact. Honesty was the foundation for growth. Pretending problems did not exist prevented solving them. Humanity had chosen to be honest with aliens because people like Nina insisted on it. That gave Gregory hope. The world waited for a response that would take more than 2 decades to arrive if it came at all. Life continued. Nina worked on her propulsion research. Gregory led his airline through ongoing cultural evolution. Scientists monitored HD 95735 for any additional signals. The message humanity sent traveled through the void between stars, carrying both the species' flaws and its aspirations. Somewhere in the darkness, those contradictions represented the truth about what humans were and what they hoped to become. 10 years after the handcuffs closed around her wrists in Denver International Airport, Nina Brooks stood on a stage in Stockholm, wearing formal attire and holding a medal. She had just been awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics for her revolutionary work on plasma propulsion systems. Her engine design had been successfully tested in deep space and was now being incorporated into the first crewed interstellar probe. Humanity would send astronauts beyond the solar system within the next decade. Nina's work had made that possible. The Nobel Committee praised her brilliance and perseverance. They mentioned her advocacy for ethical scientific advancement. They did not mention the airport incident directly, but everyone in the room knew it was part of her story. Nina's acceptance speech was broadcast live around the world. She stood at the podium in the Grand Hall and looked out at the assembled dignitaries and scientists. She thanked her colleagues at Collins Dynamics. She thanked her daughter for understanding all the late nights and missed events. She thanked Marcus Chen for being both a brilliant collaborator and a true friend. Then Nina did something unexpected. She returned to that Thursday afternoon at Gate C-47. She described being stopped for no reason. She described having her credentials questioned, despite presenting every form of identification. She described the cold metal of handcuffs and the eyes of strangers watching her humiliation. She said that moment could have ended her career if she had let it break her spirit. But Nina said the incident also clarified something important about the work she was doing. She was helping humanity reach for the stars. That was a privilege and a responsibility. The question she had asked herself in the aftermath of the handcuffs was whether humanity deserved to spread beyond Earth, a species that discriminated against its own members over meaningless differences seemed poorly equipped for cosmic citizenship. But Nina said she had come to believe that reaching for something greater could inspire humans to become better. The work of space exploration forced people to think beyond tribal boundaries. The vastness of the universe provided perspective that made human conflicts seem petty and absurd. Nina acknowledged that progress was slow and uneven. Racism still existed. Discrimination still occurred. The systems that enabled injustice remained entrenched in many places. But she said change was possible when people chose courage over comfort. She cited Gregory Hunt's response to the airport incident as an example. Most corporate leaders would have issued a vague apology and waited for the story to fade. Gregory had taken immediate accountability. He fired the employees responsible. He reformed the company's culture. He accepted financial consequences to do what was right. That kind of leadership was rare, but it demonstrated what was possible when institutions prioritized justice over convenience. Nina said the message humanity sent to HD 95735 reflected similar values. The International Committee could have crafted a message emphasizing human achievements while hiding human failures. Instead, they chose honesty. They acknowledged that humanity struggled with prejudice and violence. They admitted that humans were works in progress. That admission was uncomfortable, but it was true. Nina said she was proud of that message because it showed humanity could face its flaws rather than denying them. Self-awareness was the first step toward growth. A species that could honestly assess its shortcomings had the capacity to improve. The speech concluded with Nina looking directly into the cameras. She spoke to young people, especially those from marginalized communities. She said they would face barriers and discrimination. They would encounter people who questioned their abilities and their right to occupy space. She said those moments would hurt, and that anger was a valid response, but she urged them not to let other people's limitations become their own. She said her handcuffs did not define her. They were something that happened to her, not something that determined her worth or her future. She said the same was true for everyone facing injustice. The cruelty of others revealed their failures, not yours. Nina ended by saying that building a just world required both accountability for harm and faith in human capacity for growth. Progress happened when people demanded better, and when institutions responded with real change. The work was ongoing and difficult, but it was necessary. She thanked the Nobel Committee again and left the stage to sustained applause. The speech became one of the most watched and shared Nobel lectures in history. Educators used it in classrooms. Activists cited it in their advocacy. Parents played it for their children. Nina's words resonated because they connected personal experience to universal themes of dignity and progress. After the ceremony, Nina flew home to Atlanta. She spent a week with her daughter, who was now 16 years old. They talked about school and friends and plans for the future. Nina's daughter said she was proud but also worried. She knew her mother's work meant Nina would be traveling constantly for speaking engagements and research presentations. Nina assured her that family came first. The Nobel Prize was an honor, but it did not change what mattered most. They spent the week doing ordinary things like cooking meals and watching movies and walking in the park. Nina needed the normalcy after the intensity of Stockholm. The following month, Nina returned to Denver for a specific purpose. Skybridge Airlines had installed a memorial at Gate C-47. The memorial was a simple plaque mounted on the wall near the Jetway entrance. The plaque did not celebrate what happened. It acknowledged the incident and the changes it sparked. The text read, "At this location, Nina Brooks was wrongfully detained for attempting to board a flight in October 2015. What happened here was racial profiling, and it was wrong. This memorial acknowledges that wrong and commits to ensuring it never happens again. We recognize the harm caused and we pledge ongoing work toward justice and equity. Let this place remind us that progress requires accountability and courage." Nina stood before the memorial with her daughter and Marcus and Gregory Hunt. A small crowd gathered, including local media and civil rights advocates. Gregory spoke briefly. He said the memorial was not meant to honor Skybridge but to remember Nina and to commit publicly to continued improvement. He said the company still struggled with creating truly equitable systems. The work was not finished and probably never would be completely finished. But the commitment was real and the progress was measurable. Minority employees made up 38% of management, now compared to 12% a decade ago. Customer satisfaction scores among minority travelers had increased significantly. Complaints of discrimination had decreased, though they had not disappeared entirely. The Civil Rights Board remained active and independent. The memorial was part of maintaining institutional memory, so the lessons learned were not forgotten. Nina spoke next. She said she appreciated the memorial, but she hoped people would not focus only on what happened to her. Thousands of people experience discrimination every day. Most of those incidents were not recorded and did not go viral. The work of justice required addressing all discrimination, not just the cases that generated publicity. She said the memorial should inspire people to speak up when they witnessed unfairness. She said it should remind institutions that accountability mattered. She said it should challenge everyone to examine their own biases and to actively work toward equity. The memorial was a marker of past failure and ongoing commitment. Both aspects were important. After the speeches, Nina and her daughter walked through the airport together. They went to the same gate where Nina had been detained. They checked in for a flight to Los Angeles where Nina was giving a lecture at the California Institute of Technology. The gate agent scanned their boarding passes with a smile. They walked down the jetway without incident. It was unremarkable in the way it should always have been. Nina felt her daughter's hand in hers and felt grateful for small victories. The ability to board a plane without harassment should not be remarkable, but for too long it had been. Progress meant making dignity ordinary rather than exceptional. On the plane, Nina pulled out her tablet and reviewed the latest data from the HD 95735 monitoring project. It had been 13 years since humanity sent its message. The signal would arrive at the alien star system in about 9 more years. Scientists continued watching for any response even though they knew it would be decades before anything could return to Earth. Nina had made peace with the likelihood that she would not live to see any response. The timescales of interstellar communication exceeded human lifespans. But that did not diminish the importance of the effort. Humanity had announced its presence to the cosmos honestly. That message was traveling through the void carrying both human achievements and human acknowledgement of ongoing failures. Nina thought about what the aliens might think if they ever received and understood the message. They would learn that humanity could split atoms and decode genetics and travel beyond its home planet. They would also learn that humanity struggled with tribalism and prejudice and violence. They would see a species capable of great things held back by self-destructive tendencies. Nina wondered if other intelligent species faced similar contradictions. Perhaps the struggle between cooperation and conflict was universal among thinking beings.